Today is August 29th, 1997. We are here with Clint Schultz.
Seitz.
I apologize. We are in Columbus, Ohio at the 12th Armored Division reunion. And we will get started with a couple of questions for you. Basically, if you want to just tell me, where were you born and when?
I was born in Cincinnati, Ohio on August 31st, 1918. And I have lived right next to where I was born for practically all my life, except for the years that I spent in the Army.
Good. What were your parents like? What did your father do for a living?
My father was a farmer. He grew vegetables on the small vegetable acreage, and then he got started in the greenhouse business, and I followed him in his footsteps and continued in the greenhouse growing vegetable business all my life.
Did you enjoy that?
Pardon?
Did you enjoy that?
Oh yes, very much. And I still work part-time for a flower grower in a greenhouse. It's necessary for me to keep the soil under my fingernails, so I continue even at my age.
Neat. What was your mother like?
Well, my mother was, she really wasn't very outgoing. She was a very loving person, and a very good family person with her siblings and our children and our grandchildren. She was really great.
Good. How many brothers and sisters did you have?
I have one brother and 3 sisters, and they're all still alive in the Cincinnati area.
So what did you do for fun in Cincinnati?
Well, for fun,
As a child?
I like to go to movies, and I like to fish, and go to Cincinnati Reds baseball games.
Did you play?
I played a little sandlot ball. I played in high school, and I played some sandlot ball on Sunday for a couple of years after high school.
Okay. What was your education background?
I graduated from high school, a local Cincinnati high school, although I didn't live in the city. I lived in the outskirts. And then I attended University of Cincinnati Evening College for several years until I was drafted in the Army in 1942.
1942. And where did you head once you were notified?
I was inducted in across the river at Fort Thomas, Kentucky, and I was sent to the in the Air Force. It was called the Air Corps back in those days, and since I had a pretty high Army Ground Forces score, I was sent to weather school and became a weather observer and a teletype maintenance person, and I wasn't very happy with this, so I applied for officer candidate school and went to Fort Sill and became a shaved tail, a 30-day wonder, and as a second lieutenant in the field artillery. And up to that time, I had never seen an artillery piece. I was assigned to the 12th Armored Division. I was impressed by a school troop company, or rather battery, down at Fort Sill, taking calisthenics and gas masks. And I thought, if they're that tough, that's what I would like to be. I'd like to be an officer in the armor. So I applied for active duty in the 12th Armored Division and joined the 12th Armored at Camp Camel, Kentucky. And June the 1st, 1943.
And how long were you there at Camp Campbell?
Only a few months, and then we went to Tennessee maneuvers in the fall of 1943. And after Tennessee maneuvers, we shipped off to Abilene, Texas, and Camp Barkley, where we stayed until we went to port of embarkation and to Europe for the war.
What did you think of Camp Barkley?
I like Camp Barkley. I had never been to Texas, and the weather was a little different, but we enjoyed being there.
Any memorable experiences there?
Well, yeah, yes, I can think of one memorable experience. They had a school for medical administration, and on one particular day, the local airplane drivers, the local Air Force, came over and dropped some tear gas canisters, and they were hunting out these medical administration people. But I happened to be a rookie in the firing battery, and they had me practicing occupation of position with our armored vehicles, our armored artillery pieces, and they caught us out in the field with no gas masks and dropped these tear gas canisters right on us. So we had a quick deactivation of position.
And you learned your lesson, didn't you?
We learned our lesson. After that, we took our gas masks with us.
Since we're a little bit short of time, what do you remember of the trip to England?
Well, what I remember about it is that we were in a large convoy, and we were hounded by a pack of German submarines, and they'd come around us at night, and they'd get a little bit, when they got a little bit too close to the convoy, these destroyer escorts would drop some of their, what they called ash cans, some of their depth charges, just to keep the German submarines at their distance. And then I had two buddies on board ship who had gone through OCS with me, and we referred to ourselves as the Three Musketeers. Actually, we should have called ourselves cannoneers, since we were in the artillery. But we were very close. Each of us had been married after we reached Camp Barkley, and we had quite a lot in common, and we figured that we're going overseas as second lieutenants, and we're probably going to be forward observers. And we came to the conclusion that probably one of the three of us wouldn't be coming back, and we agreed then that we would visit the widow of the one that was left, and that's exactly what happened. We had one of the three of us was killed in combat. He was happened to be an air observer, and the pilot and the observer both were shot down by a German fighter plane, and he was killed.
What were their names?
Their names were John Carnish and Larry Wilson. And Larry Wilson survived combat, but he was left in sort of a bad medical or bad mental state due to the experience that he had as a forward observer. He went through some pretty bad situations, and in later years he commits suicide. So I'm the only one of the Three Musketeers that are left.
Did you continue contact with him after the war?
Oh yes, I did. Yes, we continued contact with the widow of the other fellow, Pat Carnish.
So what did you think of the big war when you first got there?
Well, we may as well admit most of us were scared. I mean, there was no other way to be. We'd never heard enemy artillery fire or any other kind of fire coming into our positions, and we had a hard time in the beginning ascertaining ingoing and outgoing, and it was truly frightening. But after a short length of time, I guess we all got sort of hardened to it, and we had to put up with it.
So describe your position, your responsibility.
Well, I was I went over as a possible forward observer. I was battery officer in the battery and a low man on a totem pole, and I went up to be forward observer at a town of Rohrweiler on 22nd of December of 1944, and I was attached to the 92nd Cavalry, and on the 24th I was called back to the battery. The battery was getting ready to move and support the 100th Infantry Division. And just as I got back to the battery, the battalion headquarters called for another forward observer, and they decided to send the executive officer who had trained this battery in everything that they knew about cannoneering and everything else. They sent him up as forward observer. And it proved to be a bad move because he was killed he was hit on Christmas Eve, and he died on Christmas Day. So I became the executive officer, and the executive officer of an artillery battery is the one who actually runs the commands and gives the firing command, and he is really responsible for firing the whole thing. Now, in an armored artillery battery, we had 6 105 howitzers that were mounted on medium tanks, which was a little different than the towed howitzers, and we supported the infantry and the tanks. And I started as a second lieutenant. I was promoted to first lieutenant, and I was the battery executive officer until the war was over.
And so where were you located?
Well, we were in Alsace to begin with, and then we moved up and crossed the Siegfried line up farther north, and then we crossed the Rhine River at the city of Worms, and continued down what is now called the Romantic Road area down into Württemberg, Baden, into Bavaria, and eventually we ended the war, and we were in Austria.
What did you think of the Battle of Hildesheim?
It was difficult staying up with just what was going on. It was confusing, and it proved to be a terrible situation because the intelligence didn't really let us know just what the strength of the Germans were, and we were a very, very green division, and our infantry and the tanks got into town, and they were ambushed, and it was really a sad situation. My particular battery is in position at the town of Bischwiller, and we fired many rounds and a lot of fire missions around Hurlesheim and in Steinwald Woods, and when we finally left that position, which was next to the asylum in Bischwiller, why we had a pile of brass from each one of the rounds of artillery. It was probably half the size of a house. So it was a memorable and a terrible experience.
Can you tell us of a specific instance that you recall?
At Hurlesheim, I told most of the stories as far as I'm concerned, but we were trying to rescue the people who were trapped in Hurlesheim, and some of our artillery planes, which were really meant for spotting during the daytime, they wanted to go up at night and try to find out just where our troops were, and the situation was so bad that these planes weren't used to flying at night, so they gave this idea up. They figured it wasn't worth it.
What were you feeling during the Battle of Hildesheim? Do you remember any emotions that you...
Well, one of the things that impressed me is that I was proud of the light tank company, which brought back so many of our wounded on the tanks. We'd see them pass to the rear of our firing position. They had the wounded on the outside of the tanks, and they were bringing them back. And another thing impressed me was the age of some of the German prisoners that they had taken, they seemed to be just teenagers, which they probably were. They captured quite a lot of them, and of course a lot of our people were captured as well in the town of Herrlisheim.
Were you ever wounded?
Yes, I was. I was wounded at the little town of Bull, Germany, before we crossed the Rhine. Our battalion commander, he got all over me because we were in a column and we were stopped and the vehicles were too close. And he said, "Why aren't you in a firing position to support the infantry?" And I told him that the town was less than 1,000 yards away and that I couldn't support them with indirect fire. But anyway, I pulled into firing position, and we set these 3 guns up, or the 6 guns up, usually in 2 rows of 3s. And I was out with the aiming circle, laying the gun battery on an azimuth, and we saw these bursts, probably at 1,000 yards, walking right over to us, and we knew that somebody was directing fire on us. And we looked around several towns, and the tanks hadn't succeeded in knocking out the church steeple, so we figured that there was probably a German artillery observer in one of these steeples, and he directed fire on us. Well, the bursts continued to walk right over to our firing position, and a burst hit right in the center of the position, and it wounded 6 of us, and the 5 other fellows were hit a whole lot more seriously than I was. I had just 2 small pieces of shrapnel in my right arm, and we put these people in the half tracks, and we took off for the medics. And the battery commander took over the guns and had them go to another position. And when they got to that position, where they found the same situation, that somebody was observing them, and they also received counter battery from the Germans, so they had to move out.
How long were you away from your station?
You mean due to my wounds?
Uh-huh.
Just a matter of an hour or 2, and I was right back in it.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Tell us of another battle that you can recall that was quite memorable.
Well, what we called the rat race after we crossed the Rhine was really unusual, and that we covered a lot of territory when we didn't have any Germans to fire at, except for taking prisoners, and we moved quite fast. One of the moves we made right near the end of the war was really made history, in that we made 59 miles in 7 hours. We broke out of a woods onto the Autobahn, which was similar to our superhighways nowadays, and the Germans were far ahead of us with these superhighways. And we hit this superhighway, and we found very little resistance, and we were heading down southwest toward the Inn River, which goes through Innsbruck eventually. But anyway,
Sir?
You want to cut it?
Yeah. I am so sorry.
Hello,
I
this
hope
is Randall.
this is
Does he cut it off?
Randall, state roommate. State roommate.
Let's go back to that
We-
story.
We were part of a small combat team that broke out of the woods south of Munich and came onto the Autobahn highway. And we were heading southeast, and in some of the small towns we found resistance and needed to fire some artillery fire to support a small group of infantry and the 23rd Tank Battalion. And other times where we'd move fast down this Autobahn. And en route we crossed a very deep gorge, and it had a high bridge across a small river. And as we crossed it, we noticed infantrymen lying on both ends of the bridge, trying to guard it against the Germans blowing the bridge. They knew that it was armed to be blown. So our task force finally all got across the bridge, and after we crossed it, the bridge was blown behind us, and the rest of the combat command didn't catch up to us until the next day. And we were down in this town of Fraundorf, and they were taking many prisoners, and the Germans were bringing in a lot of loot, that is guns and binoculars and things like this. And we sort of made hay on this deal. Well, anyway, we were just at the base of the Austrian Alps, which was a bad place for armor to be into, and we knew that we couldn't go very far because we couldn't fire due to the elevations and this type of thing. And then our forward troops, our observers, were up ahead, and they received some counter battery, and we had 3 people killed in the last day of combat, which was sort of a sad situation.
Did you know at that point that the end was near?
Yes, we knew it had to be near. It was finished down in Italy, and it was just a matter of time, because the Germans were giving up very fast, and we didn't know what the situation was up north, but we knew it was close to being the end. Yeah.
What did you? How did you feel about General Patton and his decisions?
Well, we had quite a lot of respect for General Patton, and we knew that he was very successful with his command of armor, and anybody who operated under General Patton, they usually were quite successful in that they covered a lot of ground, but they had a lot of casualties. I mean, that's the way Patton operated.
Were you ever hesitant?
No, I would say I was hesitant. I couldn't be.
Yeah.
There's one little story I like to tell, and that is the firing battery would occasionally get some unusual missions. That is, one of them I can think of was firing propaganda shells, and this happened up around Forbach, and I guess this was considered in Alsace before we crossed the Rhine. And I can remember one particular time we got an order from battalion headquarters at midnight that they were going to send 50 rounds of propaganda shells. And in these 105 millimeter shells, there were quite a number of, I don't know just how many, pamphlets trying to convince the German army and the civilians apparently to give up and try to avoid some of the casualties. And along with these 50 rounds of propaganda shells that were delivered, we were given about 8 or 10 coordinates of places that we had to fire so many rounds on each coordinate, and some of them were small towns, and others were road intersections. So we had till 5 o'clock in the morning to compute the commands and find a firing position, and we had to find this position as far forward as we could, because the coordinates we had were at maximum range. So we just picked a spot on the map, and we figured that this was going to be where we're going to put the gun without even having to look at it, which wasn't a very good situation. So in the dark the next morning, we took one howitzer up forward, and we put it in a position that we thought we had on our map, and we saw some forms crawling up toward the tank, and it happened to be right in the middle of a mortar position. And these fellows were really unhappy, because they knew that if you put an artillery piece right in their position, the Germans would probably pick up where our shells were coming from, and they'd probably get some German counter battery on them. But anyway, we fired our rounds of propaganda shells, and we got out of there and back to the rest of the battery. And of course, we had no idea what was on the pamphlets we were shooting. We computed each one of the rounds to have a set on the air burst. This was time fire, and we could set the fuse on the shell to burst at a certain height above each one of these coordinates, and every command was computed accordingly. So we never knew the results of our firing. We just fired the rounds and got out of there.
Did you get any counter fire?
No, we didn't. No, not a particular case. We didn't. No.
Wow. Did you ever have any involvement with the civilians?
No, not a whole lot. I couldn't speak German. Our first sergeant could speak German, and this was quite a big advantage to the rest of the people in the battery, because he could find billets for some of the men to stay inside rather than have to live in their pup tents or live in their tanks. And I didn't have a whole lot to do with the civilians. I can remember one particular case. We'd had a new second lieutenant came over from the States, and he was made a forward observer. And on a move cross country off the highway, we had one of our M7s was running out of gas, and the rest of them had just been gassed up. And we sent this second lieutenant back along the column, supposedly with a peep driver, to find the gas trucks and gas this other tank so we wouldn't lose it. And going back along the column, he got off the road, and he got over into an area that hadn't been cleared, and they were machine gunned, and they were missing the lieutenant and the peep driver were missing for 3 or 4 days. And this happened to be the peep driver of the wire crew. And the wire corporal, he was sort of a tough guy, and he was very close to this peep driver. And he was really upset about his being missing. And in this small town, he happened to be walking across the street, coming over to the gun, and an older German civilian on a bicycle cut right in front of him, and he knocked the civilian off the bicycle. And of all the bad situation, the division artillery commander happened to be in the vicinity, and he saw this, and he demanded that this man be court-martialed. And my battery commander, being a West Pointer and also the full colonel of the division artillery, he was a full colonel and also a West Pointer. And my battery commander knew that he was going to be in a very, very bad stead if he said he's going to try to save this guy's hide, and he was going to defend him. Anyway, he succeeded in defending him without hurting his reputation too much, and the corporal got off because he tried to explain the situation of his peep driver being missing. Well, the peep driver and the Jeep finally turned up 3 or 4 days later, but the officer had been killed, so that was another one that we had lost from our battery.
Who was this that was, do you remember his name?
Yes, his name was Robert Wilson, and he had been with our battery probably 2 weeks or less. In my particular battery, we had 3 officers killed, and 3 of us were wounded, and we'd never had over 3 officers assigned to the battery one time. They just come and go. That's the way it was.
was your relationship with your superior commanders?
I think it was very good. My battery commander, Captain Carey, they really gave me good opportunities to be a second in command of this battery, and I really had never dreamed that I'd even get that far. And it was a matter of taking over for a man who'd trained this battery and everything they knew about firing, and it was really a tough assignment.
Who were some of your buddies during the war that you?
Well, I mentioned these what we called the Three Musketeers. Those are the ones that we were closest to, and of course the officers were pretty close. We had officer battalion meetings and this type of thing, and we'd get to know these fellows quite well and could understand what they were telling us as far as their responsibilities were concerned, and we try to carry it right down the chain of command.
And who was that?
Well, our battalion commander, who is now deceased, was Colonel Hockman, and some of his staff were Captain Corman. He's deceased, and I can just name it. Go right on down the line. It seems that we probably have 50% or more at this point that are deceased and gone.
Were you involved at all with the concentration camps?
No, I wasn't. When this camp at Landsberg, or possibly more than one camp, was liberated, my particular battery was in a column pressing the attack, and we were crossing a high railroad bridge. And I can't remember of very many railroad bridges that we'd gone across with the armored vehicles. But apparently the engineers had approved this railroad bridge to stand all this weight to take all these armored vehicles across the bridge. And I can remember being right out in the middle of that bridge, and I heard on the radio that someone from the 12th Armored had discovered this concentration camp, and I have no more connection with it than the stories I've heard and the pictures that I've seen. And this was in Landsberg, Germany.
What were your feelings about that?
Well, actually, at that point in the war, we knew very little about the concentration camps. I mean, you hear all the stories later, and there was very little that we had heard about it. And I was one of the people who later, and up to this day, I've never been convinced that Hitler and all his henchmen were that selective in picking out only the Jews to exterminate, because I know of many more other nationalities and political prisoners and other people who were starved to death and gassed and whatever else.
So, you were near Austria when the war ended. What do you remember of the day that you heard that it was over?
Well, everybody was very much elated. We just didn't know what our future was going to be, and it was quite a big blow to our lives, because we were I guess at that point we were supporting infantry and artillery and tanks, and to fire on troops or to fire on a little town was just second nature to us, and we didn't think very much of it.
Do you remember, did you celebrate the day that you heard?
No, I can't think of any celebration. We just began to pull back and try to take up whatever duties that came along.
What was the morale of the rest of the company?
I'd say at that point it was very good, very good. Those of us were in the battery were happy to be alive.
Was there any complications as you were returning? Any problems?
Well, the first town that we stopped to billet in when we came out of Fraundorf was a town of Sondheim, and we pulled in that town, and we took some houses as billets, and the battery commander came to me and he said, "Do you realize what town this is?" And I said, "Yeah, it hadn't occurred to me what town it was." And he said, "Do you realize that we're the only battery that fired on this town?" And we looked around and we saw the damage that our artillery shells had done to this town, and we were sort of amazed because there were barns that had been burned out and houses that had been hit, and we didn't know how much damage we'd done to the population. I said, "Well, it seems that it's a good idea that these people don't realize that we're the people that fired on them, because here we are sitting in their town after the conflict is over."
So what did you do? Did you have sufficient points to return home, or?
No, I didn't have sufficient points. Officers needed more points than enlisted men, and I was one of the first officers to be transferred out of the 12th Armored Division. I was transferred to the 36th Infantry Division, which is the famous Texas division that had fought in Sicily and in Italy, and practically the whole artillery battalion that I was assigned to had been sent home, and they had nothing but the records. So we just went in there as new troops. And we lasted only possibly a month or so, and then they decided to send the 36th Infantry Division home. And I was transferred to a Field Artillery Observation Battalion. And this observation battalion would happen to be the sister battalion of the one that was massacred up at Mount Malmedy, up in the Battle of the Bulge. And the few people that were left in this observation battalion knew quite a lot of the people who had been killed up at Malmedy. They were just mowed down. That was quite a well publicized situation up there. And I remained with this Field Artillery Observation Battalion as a battery commander until I had sufficient points, and I came back in late January of 1946.
Was that artillery battalion difficult to work with, or?
Yes, it was quite difficult because we had 18-year-old fellows from the draftees from the United States. They had never seen combat, and they had very little training as far as discipline is concerned, and no esprit de corps for an organization, and they caused us quite a lot of trouble. And when my points came up, boy, I was itching to get home.
Can you give us a specific instance that you remember the difficult problems?
Well, I can't think of any in particular, but we did have several court-martials of people that got out of line, drunkenness, and this type of thing. And while I was in this Field Artillery Observation Battalion, we were at the city of Ludwigsburg, and our mission was to guard 6 former German camps, which now the Americans had big little Nazis, and we had to have our troops out at these 6 posts, and we had very little opportunity to get the whole battery together to orient them on anything. So it was a pretty difficult assignment, and this happened to be right before Christmas, and there was a rumor around that the Germans were going to try to make a break from these camps on Christmas. So we organized our machine guns at the guard posts and timed them so we'd get some tracer fire at night, and we had quite a display of fireworks, so that discouraged them from making any break. But it was an interesting situation. At one of the camps, we happened to get the Nazi leader in the United States, Fritz Kuhn, that they finally deported back to Germany. They brought him into this camp, and we were just dumbfounded when we saw that he had a couple of 6x6 trucks loaded with cigarettes and all kinds of material that they allowed to bring for his personal use. So anyway, before they got into camp, they wanted to get some records on him so they could give him a particular job in camp. And this camp commander found that he had been a chemical engineer, and he says, "Oh, I have just the job for Fritz." So Fritz came into camp, and I came up on a balcony on the third tier one day, and there was Fritz with a stick, and he was dyeing GI uniforms black, and that was his job. They figured that was a good job for a chemical engineer.
So you returned, let's see, when did you return to the States then?
I returned in February of 1946.
What did you do?
What I do for a living? I went back to the greenhouse business. My father owned a greenhouse plant. I worked for him a couple of years, and I went into business with him. And we raised mainly tomatoes in a greenhouse, and I'd been in the business for almost 50 years since then.
I was going to ask you, did your brother, was your brother involved in the
No, he was married at a young age, and they had a child, and he never served in the military.
Going back a little bit, do you recall the day you heard about the bombing of Pearl Harbor?
Yes, very much so. Yeah, I happened to be at our church, and we were rehearsing for a play, and I didn't know very much about Pearl Harbor, but it was quite a blow when we heard the details, and it was just hard to believe.
How did your family respond?
Well, they knew that I was going to be called in the service because I'd had a deferment due to being in agriculture before this, and of course when this happened at Pearl Harbor, they were pretty sure that I'd be called in as a recruit.
Was your father in World War I?
No, he wasn't. No. No, back in those days, they didn't take people in agriculture. They figured they needed to produce food.
So were you anxious or nervous, or can you explain your feelings when you got your draft notice?
Well, I wasn't too happy about going. I don't know. I guess maybe I'm a born coward. But anyway, we had to make the most of it, and so we got through it.
And how many children did you have?
We have 5 children and 8 grandchildren.
Well, can you think of anything else you'd like to tell us?
Well, this story's been written up in Hellcat News, and a lot of people have heard about it. I think it's interesting that I met my wife in Abilene, and we were married there. And my wife was with her sister, who at about age 20 had a young son, and she came down to Abilene at Camp Barkley to help take care of the child, and her sister's husband happened to be a fellow officer, and the day they arrived, there happened to be an officers' party, and my sister, she became my sister-in-law, but her husband, being a battalion mate of mine, asked me whether I wanted to go to this dance as a blind date for his sister-in-law. So I met my wife, who became my wife, that night, and 5 weeks later we were married at Chapel 4 at Camp Barkley. And we lived in Abilene probably 5 or 6 weeks until we left for Camp Shanks and eventually overseas. But we had never been back to Abilene, and when they had this ceremony back in October of '96, well, we got back to Abilene and got to visit the university and toured the place. And of course, there was nothing we could recognize, but 52 years had gone by, and we certainly enjoyed getting back to Abilene.
What do you remember about Abilene when you were there? Did you have any, I'm sure you had leave time.
Well, I didn't remember very much about the town at all. I stuck pretty much to the battery while I was single, and then I courted my wife for any time we had off until we were married and went overseas. But what I could remember is that the town had grown to such a city that there was hardly anything we could recognize. The thing I did recognize was the hotel, which is right across from the railroad station. And at this ceremony in October, we happened to have a dinner there one night, and we saw the pillars standing. I think this building is now the museum, and we saw these pillars standing in the lobby, and we recognized this. And it's been a long time.
When did you join or find out about the 12th Association?
Well, they apparently had a roster, and I joined it. I joined the association right soon after it was formed. I wasn't with the 12th anymore when they started in Heidenheim, but when they got back to the States, I just wasn't interested in going to reunions until 1963. And we attended our first one in St. Louis in 1963, and over the next 35 years, my wife and I have just missed 5 in 35 years. So we've attended a lot of reunions, so consequently we get to know a lot of people. We went with the first large contingent that took a trip to Europe in 1971, and we learned to know people from every one of the units, the division, and that's one of the reasons we know so many people.
Well, I don't have any other questions. Did you have any questions for him? No? Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that.